I thought that I heard you all say something to the effect that the oceans and forests produce oxygen, and Brian said something I didn't really understand about fish and their effect on something, and you said something about the ocean. So something about like in 2048, which is 35 years ago, we're overfishing, there's going to be no fish, and that was more than just like a problem of not having fish. It was a problem with oxygen. So maybe I didn't understand it. What are you saying is the problem with the oceans and forests in terms of oxygen and then dying? What exactly is going on, and how bad an issue is this?
Well, with Brian's permission, let me kind of jump in just very quickly, just to give you somewhat of a very good summary of what you're trying to bring into play here. First of all, right, it's not science fiction at all. It's not something that I concocted. It's, again, something that you could spend some time, very minimal time, just Googling and looking in terms of what most scientists who understand, who have the science behind them, are predicting that our oceans, in terms of the large fish and most of the about 1,000 species of fish or types of fish that we're following right now, they can be tracked. They'll be reduced to less than 10% of what their current stocks are. Right now, all large fish, which are including swordfish, tuna, most of the predatory fish, halibut, have already been reduced to 96%. They're 96% gone. They're less than 5% of those numbers left. And that's today. So a number of researchers have predicted that our oceans will be essentially devoid of any life that will be reversible in certainly our lifetime, or most likely over the next 100 years, by the year 2048. And yes, that includes, by that time, because of the complexity of the intertwining, interdependent life systems, we're extracting, essentially, harvesting targeted fish. Most of those were the easiest fish to see and to catch were the large fish. We're also taking in terms of numbers, we're harvesting pelagic fish, which are the medium depth fish, anchovies, sardines, herring, and then we're also extracting krill, which is the most abundant life on Earth right now, without realizing what it's doing to all the other forms of sea life and the other forms of life that depend on these, that live in and around the oceans, including our whales and seals and et cetera. So, yeah, that's not science fiction. It's something that's predicted by a number of researchers. And one last quick thing about that is, and I mentioned this a number of times in my book. I discuss it, quite well in depth about. Again, one of the largest concerns I have is that not only is it not being addressed correctly and the information is being mismanaged or suppressed, but now we're creating curtains in terms of terms which are misused, such as the term sustainable. And so anytime you see a sustainable label, such as by the Monterey Bay Aquarium and Seafood Watch, or MSC, it typically means that they are unable to correctly define whatever species they're bringing to your plate in terms of how many there are left. They can't really define or quantify the total sustainable yield, which then leads to the maximum allowable catch, which they are terms that the fishing industry uses. But they, by all means, have no idea what effect that has on all the interrelated infinite amount of ecosystems that are affected. But they're guided by economics. And one last thing about that, MSC has about 196 fisheries that they've certified. There hasn't been one to date. There's been one that's been questioned, so I have to qualify that, but there has not been one to date that has been declined. And they average about $120 to $150,000 that they're paid. They're set up as a nonprofit organization that originated in the late 1990s from Unilever and World Wildlife Fund, which is an odd combination, but they felt that was what would work, and it's failed miserably. but not in the public's eyes, because the general public is just yearning so badly to find some justification for continuing to eat something that they don't need to eat from a health standpoint. In fact, it's detrimental to them, as Brian will discuss much more with you. But that's a serious issue, and a lot of this is propelled by, again, funding. So anyway, I hope that helps a little bit. And
as Dr. Oppenlander just stated, when I was doing 3 years of research to compile my book, Killer Fish, I was stunned that every single marine biologist and oceanographic scientist of any stature worldwide says the oceans will be dead in the year 2048. How many years is that from now? Listen to what I've said. Dead. Now, many of us probably think trees and bushes and plants give us most of our oxygen. You're wrong. Most of the oxygen on this earth, just like the ocean being about 70% of your oxygen comes from diatoms, plants in the ocean. One of the people I admired most in my life was Jacques Cousteau. I think he wasn't a pioneer in the oceans. I think he was a prophet. And when I heard him speak in 1970, he said, when we kill the diatoms, the human race has little to no time left. That's what's happening. Now, the oceans are a beautiful, perfect, evolutionary, godly, universal ecosystem. And the large fish and the small fish play like the London Symphony together, in perfect harmony, balance. And once we take the violinist off the stage, or the oboist, or the celloist, or the percussionist, it starts to fall apart. And the symphony is no longer playing. And with Dr. Oppenlander, I'm so in admiration that he's speaking about this now, because this has been missed by the food-based community. It's always about chicken. It's always about red meat. No, it's just as important, if not more important. I think it's more important, the fish issue. So this is another little thing to concern yourself about, but I am an optimist. I think that when humans are really in peril, and people do know what's happening, and it's not going to be only we that let this happen. When we start to have 1 foot of water down on Wall Street, when we start to have fighting going on in the United States among fellow Americans because they no longer have food, and they've been conned and trained as consumers that you die if you don't have meat. So they get their guns, which we seem to love in this country, and they start shooting their neighbors. And this is going to happen, because I don't see how this is not going to happen. And you have a population right here, we're speaking, this is the epicenter, 25 million people in this metropolitan area. 25 million people. I happened to live in Boston at one point where they had a crippling snowstorm that paralyzed the city. No planes, no trucks, no cars came in or out for a week. And within 24 hours, every bit of food, they stood in lines for 2-3 blocks, were purchased, and the poor and the elderly were starting to eat cat food. And nothing happened. Nothing happened. I saw this with my own eyes. I'm an optimist. I think things are getting bad. They're getting really bad. And I think we all have to find the tipping point. And the tipping point is you. We may be the authorities, we may be the people that inform you, but again, we're 1 or 2 or 10 or 20 or 30, and the truth about health will give you lots of information, but we need you everywhere on the planet Earth to start to enlist in this army I spoke about earlier. and start to be a walking, living, talking example of what has been discussed over this 3 days. You're part of the problem if you can't change your life. You're part of the problem. So we need you to change your life and to become humane again by self-respect first.
Yeah, very good.